All right, let us start. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to Department of Mathematics at Harvard University. My name is Artan Sheshmani. I'm an associate professor of mathematics. I'm affiliated with Center for Mathematical Sciences and Applications here at Harvard University, as well as the European Center for Quantum Geometry of Moduli Spaces. Ladies and gentlemen, we have gathered here tonight to honor the life and mathematical legacy of Maryam Mirzakhani. I feel personally, right now, honored and sad at the same time. I feel truly honored that I was given permission by the main organizers and the math department to stand before you and moderate an event for Miriam. She was my role model, mathematical role model, all my life. And at the same time, I feel deeply sad, since this truly was not the event I wished to moderate for. This is because our Miriam passed away tragically about a month ago, July 14, 2017, in California at the age of 40, after a long time battle with cancer. Maryam Mirzakhani is the only female winner of the Fields Medal, the most prestigious award in mathematics, also known as Nobel Prize for Mathematicians. In fact, on this very day, August 13, 3 years ago, in 2014, Miriam got the medal. I personally, specifically, remember that night. I was sitting home late at night in Ohio. At the time, I was in Ohio, watching Miriam online on my laptop when she got the medal. And what a feeling it was. How proud I was of knowing Miriam. And how proud I was of my country and our generation. To grieve for Miriam's passing away, in my opinion, is especially hard-hitting due to the fact that Miriam is truly regarded as a role model for a large body of scholars belonging to the recent young generation of academics in Iranian and international community. Ladies and gentlemen, we have gathered here tonight to learn why this is so. Why is Miriam so special? Why could she be a role model for us all? Is it just a Fields Medal, or are there other true values to her from which we could learn lessons? We have several of Miriam's friends, colleagues, instructors, students here with us tonight who are going to elaborate on these, share with us their memories of her, and possibly comment on her impact on our academic community as well as society. Before we start the program, I would like to acknowledge that this event could not become possible without the hard work of the main organizers, the Harvard Iranian Student Association, as well as the Boston-based Iranian scholars. I would further like to acknowledge the kind and generous support of the Department of Mathematics especially the department chair, Professor Kurt McMullen, who kindly decided to fully sponsor this event. Now, without any further ado, please allow me to introduce our first speaker. It's with great pleasure and honor to have Professor Roya Beheshti of the Department of Mathematics at Washington University in St. Louis, who is going to share with us some memories of Miriam.
Hi, my name is Roya Beheshti, and I met Miriam in September of 1988 on one of the first days of the 6th grade. That was the beginning of middle school, and we became close friends since then. And for the next 7 years, we shared a desk at school and sat next to each other. Our friendship is old enough that I even remember a time when Miriam was not good at math. In the first year, Miriam was the top student in every class except for math, where she was not among the top students. One of the memories that I have of that year is when our math teacher was returning our tests. It was toward the end of the academic year. Miriam got her test back, and she had a score of 16 out of 20. That was a difficult test, but there were students who had done better than that. Miriam was so frustrated that before putting the test in her bag, she tore it apart and said that that was it for her, and she was not going to even try to do better. This is Miriam when she was 11. That didn't last very long. After the summer break, she came back with her confidence regained, and she started to do very well. I never found out what happened over that summer that changed her attitude. But after that, math became a shared passion, and we spent a lot of time thinking and talking about math. I should say that the school we went to, it was from grade 6 to 12. It was a special selective school with a very capable principal. It was an all-girls school with very good teachers, and the environment was very encouraging for the students who were interested in math or science. There was an equivalent boys' school, and we had some common teachers, and we would hear about the boys who were good in math, and it was always very motivating to try to do better than them. I should also mention that we entered that school a month after the war had ended, and the country was becoming more stable. There were a few programs for high school students that I think had important roles in a lot of Iranian mathematicians of my generation becoming interested in math. One of them was the math Olympiad competitions. The other one was a summer workshop run by Sharif University for high school students that we participated in after we finished the 9th grade. And that had an important impact in Miriam's growing interest in math. That was also the first time that she got recognition outside of our school. The rest of Miriam's story is better known. She participated in Olympiad competitions, and then she went to Sharif University, and then to Harvard for her PhD. Miriam never liked to brag or even talk about her achievements. And that's something that everyone who has had any interactions with her attests to. To me, it is very impressive that she could combine that with her other extraordinary qualities. She always dreamed very big. She was very confident, determined, focused, hardworking. Another memory that I recall is from the first semester that we were in the US. That was the fall of 1999. We were 22. Miriam was at Harvard. I was at MIT. And I was taking a course that Miriam was auditing. The final was a take-home exam that I picked up in the evening and was supposed to turn it in the morning. So that evening, Miriam came to my office for moral support in case I had to stay up. So I worked on the problems. I did all but one of them, and the last one looked difficult. So I told Miriam about it, and we thought on it for a couple of hours. We had found a paper that we thought had some connections to that problem, but the paper was very difficult to read. So I gave up. Around 2 or 3 a.m., I decided that I had done enough, and I was too sleepy, so I decided to take a nap. But Miriam was so deep into thinking that she said she wanted to work more. So I took a nap, and I woke up around 7 or 6 in the morning, and Miriam was still up. And she said she thought she had figured out how to do that problem, and she was just checking the last step. And then she explained everything to me, and sure enough, she had the solution. That turned out to be a very difficult problem and not really meant to be handed in. I'm still amazed by that when I think about it, because for a graduate student, it is not so unusual to stay up all night if there is a deadline. But for Miriam, that was not the case. She didn't need a grade. It was not her research problem. She was not even helping me anymore. I think for her, it was, on the one hand, the attitude that she had toward a lot of things in life, that I'm going to finish what I started and I can finish it. And on the other hand, it was the pleasure, the pure joy that she drew from doing math, and that didn't change over the years by gaining experience or fame. It was always inspiring to talk to Miriam about math, even during the last year after she was diagnosed with recurrent cancer. Her focus was not her research anymore. It was her health, of course, although she did still take her responsibilities seriously, corresponding with her students and writing recommendation letters. It was a difficult time, but still, when it came to anything related to math, it was uplifting and inspiring to talk to her. She had such a positive personality. It really always felt good to talk to her. Let me finish by saying that I think Miriam was very lucky to have had amazing people around her. Her husband, Jan, who was there for her during all these years. Her sister, Leila, who came all the way from Iran after Miriam's cancer, came back to be with her. Her parents, who after finally getting their visas, could come to the US and be with Miriam in her last few months. They all did what they could to make sure that she was as comfortable and happy as possible. And I think Miriam felt at peace having those wonderful people around her. Thank you.
All right, so can you hear me? No? Once again, I would like to ask if people are there here with the seats, empty seats next to you, please raise your hand so that those standing over there can come and find some seats. You can come down here. There are some seats available. It's not working. Not working? Okay. There are some seats available here. You can come if you're standing over there. Okay, so as for our second speaker, it's with great pleasure and honor to have the Distinguished Professor of Physics Department, Professor Cumrun Vafa, whom I would like to invite to come here and share with us some comments about Miriam. Cumrun.
Thank you, Artan. It is difficult to believe that Maryam Mirzakhani, who passed away just about a month ago, has had such a global impact in such a short lifetime. Her untimely passing has not only saddened relatives, friends, and millions who admire her achievements, but also has deprived the world of mathematics from the works she would have produced if her life was not cut so tragically short. The grief that her passing has caused is reflected in the numerous spontaneous memorials that have been held in her honor around the world. It is befitting to have one such memorial here at Harvard, which I believe played a key role in her intellectual development and paved the way for her brilliant contributions to mathematics. I first heard Maryam's name from Iranian mathematician Professor Sheshmani when he visited Harvard in 1999. He was telling me about the status of math in Iran and that there are a number of exceptional talents emerging there. In particular, he mentioned Maryam's name and said he expects great work from her in the future. She was only an undergraduate student in Iran back then. His conviction about her potential stuck with me. And I remembered it when I received a call in the fall of that year from my math colleague, Professor Joe Harris, who was in math department's admissions committee. He told me that Maryam Mirzakhani has applied for admission to Harvard, and he asked me whether I knew about her. Based on what I had heard from Professor Sheshmani about her, I strongly recommended that she be admitted to Harvard. I first saw her here at Harvard just before her studies started, when she participated in a workshop that I had organized on mirror symmetry. I was pleasantly surprised to see her in that workshop because it was on a topic somewhat specialized in the interface of mathematics and physics. As her studies began, I would see her occasionally on campus and also in the gatherings of Iranian students. She did first-rate work while still a student here. Her proof of Witten's conjecture that related to string theory caught my attention. We met and discussed whether her techniques could be used to prove similar conjectures emerging from string theory. What struck me from these conversations was how modest she was in describing her brilliant work. She would talk about it in such a matter-of-fact way that one would think it's very simple to do what she did. Even then, she had already gathered praise of many of the math faculty at Harvard as a brilliant mathematician. But she also had many other interests. For example, I recall her volunteerism as a student here in assisting disabled students get to class and supporting them. Once I saw her, actually right outside the Science Center, leading a blind student to a class, very calmly walking together, and then I saw her run to rush to her own class. It is a rarity to see someone function at that ideal standard in so many aspects of life. Her beautiful work in math will have lasting legacy. Mathematical truths last forever. The fact that these achievements were recognized by awards is perhaps secondary for the world of mathematics, but it did have great impact beyond math. She won the Fields Medal, the highest recognition in mathematics, exactly 3 years ago on this day. In a sign of her modesty, she did not even share this news ahead of time with her parents, who found out about it through news media. She explained later to them that it was not a big deal. Her winning the Fields Medal was a singular achievement, not only because she was the first woman to receive it, but also because she was from Iran. This shattered the notion that Iranian women are not educated in Iran. Maryam, with the help of supporting school principal, participated in the International Math Olympiad competitions and won 2 gold medals, one for a perfect score. She continued her education in Iran by doing spectacularly well in her undergraduate studies in math at Sharif University in Iran before coming to Harvard. As scientists and mathematicians, we much prefer not to be entangled in the politics of the day. But it is difficult not to think of the consequences of banning a brilliant mind like Maryam's from entering this country and limiting her ability to contribute to the world of mathematics based on baseless bias and prejudice against one group of people versus others. How many other scientists and mathematicians could be deprived from this center of knowledge if these ill-advised policies move forward? Enthusiasm about mathematics is not new for Iranians. In fact, many prominent mathematicians in old times emerged from Persia. Khwarazmi, whose contributions to math still ring today with the word algebra from the name of his book, and Khayyam, known among other things for a geometric solution to cubic equations, are 2 notable examples. However, in the more recent history, for various reasons, this tradition has not continued at the same level. Maryam and her generation of mathematicians in Iran are showing once again that Iranian researchers can contribute to knowledge at the highest levels. I am convinced that given opportunities and supportive environment, that men and women anywhere in the world can produce first-rate work. Knowledge and its pursuit is a timeless, borderless, and yes, genderless adventure. As a scientist, I feel that one of the most satisfying aspects of developing science is that we interact with colleagues from all over the world with diverse backgrounds. And we are open to brilliant ideas regardless of where they originate from. Maryam beautifully exemplified how true and important this open culture of math and science is for the development of knowledge. I believe that her talent, curiosity, and drive were among the most important reasons for her success. She showed how to methodically continue and not give up in the face of adversity and difficulty. Important as the internal aspects are to her success, the impact of teachers and educators both in Iran and in the US were also key factors. In Iran, these included Professor Tabesh, Professor Mahmoudian, and Professor Sheshmani. At Harvard, my colleagues here in the math department, and in particular, her PhD advisor, Professor McMullen, himself a Fields medalist, played a key role in her development as a mathematician. The interaction with collaborators and support by friends and colleagues cannot be underestimated either. A notable example of this is Roya, Beheshti, whom we just heard about, who was her lifetime friend and colleague from early high school days. And of course, the support of her family was critical. Perhaps it's tempting to place her accomplishments in such an esteemed position that one can only admire it as an unachievable legacy. This would be a grave error. I doubt she would have wanted to be remembered like that. Instead, I believe she would have wanted us to view her achievements as perfectly achievable by anyone, regardless of gender, from anywhere in the world by those who are willing to work hard to achieve the highest levels of knowledge. With this in mind, creating an international institute in mathematics and basic science, perhaps based in Iran, would be one way we can honor her legacy. She opened the road, and now it's up to us to help pave it for the generations to come. Regardless of what we do to honor her, her achievements in math will shine forever. May she rest in peace. Thank you.
All right, so for our third speaker, I would like to invite Professor Kurt McMullen, the chair of the Department of Mathematics at Harvard University and former advisor of Miriam.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be able to participate at this event in memory of Maryam Mirzakhani, and to add to the picture of what she was like that Cumrun and Roya have already painted so beautifully. I had the privilege of knowing Miriam as a student and as a colleague and as a friend, starting in the year 2000. And I remember her as an unpretentious and open person, and as someone who combined modesty with fearless ambition when it came to attacking mathematical problems. She brought the same courage to her attack on the deepest mathematical questions as she did to her battle with cancer. So what I would like to do is to describe to you some of my impressions of Miriam's path from graduate student at Harvard to world-renowned mathematician. And I'll tell some anecdotes and show a couple of slides to give you a non-technical idea of what her work was about. So first, let me say what it was like to meet Miriam as a graduate student. So she began attending an informal seminar that I was holding with my other students, and then she began coming to my office to ask questions. And the first thing that struck me was how imaginative her questions were. Now, of course, all graduate students have questions in mathematics, but Miriam's questions were more like mathematical short stories of her own invention, sometimes fictional, but always intriguing. And when I later learned that when she was younger, she had had the ambition to be a writer, that made perfect sense. And I realized what she was trying to do was craft a narrative to make sense of the mathematical world that she was going to do research in. And indeed, doing mathematical research, especially at the frontiers, is like climbing a mountain that no one else has climbed before. And along the way, there will be steep cliffs that have to be scaled. But perhaps the hardest part is to find a route to the summit and to maintain the determination to continue when it seems impossible. Now, the gold medal winners of high school math Olympiads, like Miriam, have already shown that they can climb steep cliffs. But it was Miriam's ability to craft mathematical narratives that showed that she also had the more unusual skills required to find a route to the summit. So let me just briefly talk about how her thesis came about. So she reported in my seminar on an isolated but beautiful formula discovered many years ago by McShane about surfaces with one hole, surfaces shaped like a donut. And when she presented this paper, it was clear that she had deeply understood at an intuitive level what was going on in the paper. And in fact, at the end of her talk, she did something new that no one had done before with this odd formula, which is she computed the volume of a certain moduli space. Now, I should say that moduli spaces are central players in mathematical research today, and computing their volumes is one of the major challenges we try to address. It's as fundamental as computing the area of a circle as pi r squared. So that was already quite interesting, but a few weeks later, she announced that she could prove the same formula, not for surfaces just with one handle, but with surfaces of any number of handles. And then using that formula, she could calculate the volumes of not just one special and rather easy moduli space, but of all moduli spaces. So that was a surprise. And then a few weeks later, she told me that using her understanding of the volumes of moduli spaces, she could prove a major problem in string theory, this famous conjecture of Ed Witten, first proved by Kontsevich, that Cumrun alluded to, a deep formula in relating quantum field theory and gravity that has had a profound impact on the connection between the deepest parts of mathematical physics, field theory and so on, and the parts that are accessible to current research mathematicians. So the story of her thesis was a remarkable development with humble origins. It began with the simple problem of counting loops on a donut shape, and it ended with the solution to a problem in mathematical physics. And I should say that although this problem had been solved before, Miriam had found a completely new approach, and the circle of ideas she introduced had worldwide impact. She immediately became a major player on the mathematical stage. And as you may know, she then went on to Princeton and then ultimately to Stanford, where she became a tenured professor. So now let me say a word about her most famous work, for which she was awarded the Fields Medal. So this can be described in elementary terms as involving the connection between the dynamics of billiards and, again, the theory of surfaces with many handles. So a traditional billiard table is shaped like a rectangle, and you might want to investigate the long-term behavior of a ball bouncing off the sides of this figure as a sort of idealized dynamical system. And to study billiards in a rectangle, you can transform it into a problem about straight lines on a torus, on a donut. But what if you wanted to investigate billiards in, say, a five-sided billiard table? This turns out to be much more challenging, but it can be transformed into a problem not about a donut, but a surface with two handles. And the challenge that Miriam took on was to uncover universal patterns in dynamical systems through a deep study of this simple problem. Now, I should say that dynamical systems are all around us. They're the physical laws that cover the motion of the planets in their orbits. There are the fluctuations of the stock market, which can be modeled by a dynamical system with random elements. Even the beating of the human heart can be described by a dynamical system. So Miriam's contribution lies in the abstract part of the theory of dynamics, but it's part of an extremely broad endeavor that connects all sciences and lies at the heart of the very idea of scientific prediction. Okay, so now returning to this problem of billiards, I want to remark that in 2004, I tried to address the same problem that Miriam had attacked, and I thought I had made a big breakthrough when I solved it for surfaces with two handles. Well, 10 years later, in a spectacular tour de force, Miriam, in collaboration with Alex Eskin, solved it for surfaces with any number of handles. And it was one of the major accomplishments for which she was recognized by the Fields Medal, the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in mathematics. So to give you a little more insight into what Miriam did and also share some of my own memories of her, let me switch over to some slides. So this is a picture of Miriam when she first became a professor at Stanford, and it's very much how I remember her as a student. And here's a picture of Miriam that was part of a nice article written around the time she won the Fields Medal. I like this picture because it gives you an idea of her mathematical process. She worked very visually and with geometric intuition. So here she is with a large piece of paper sprawled out on the floor of her home in Palo Alto, drawing pictures of billiard tables and surfaces and handles. And to give you just a more concrete pictures of these surfaces we've been talking about, here's just a couple of illustrations. The simplest surface is the sphere, the most familiar. By the donut, I mean this surface with one handle, shown at the top right. And then you can imagine surfaces with 2 handles and 3 handles and so on. Now, I should say that as the number of handles increases, the complexity of these surfaces accelerates dramatically. And in fact, the surfaces with 2 or 3 or more handles are all spaces of negative curvature, unlike the sphere, which is a space of positive curvature. And indeed, Manjul Bhargava, who was awarded the Fields Medal at the same time as Miriam, once described her as a master of negatively curved spaces. Now, this next slide gives you just an idea of Miriam's thesis. So her thesis concerned surfaces with any number of handles. I've drawn surfaces of genus 2. On the left-hand side, you see a classical result. People had tried to count the number of loops you can draw on a surface of genus 2 where the loops are allowed to cross themselves. And there's a classical result called the prime number theorem, which tells you about how many loops you expect to have of length L or less. And it grows exponentially fast. Now, what Miriam studies was loops that are not allowed to cross themselves. They're called simple closed curves, one of which is shown in this picture. And she showed for the first time that the number of simple closed curves grows like a polynomial now, much more slowly, but with an exact asymptotics. And the asymptotic depends in a delicate way on the shape of the surface being investigated. Now, here's a technical-looking slide. Just to give you an idea of the depth of her work, I've tried to write down as briefly as possible the famous Witten conjecture about characteristic classes on moduli space. And this was a consequence of her deep understanding of the theory of curves on surfaces. But I'd also like to point out that there are some down-to-earth and elementary problems she solved at the same time. For example, you can ask, if you take a surface with 2 handles and draw a loop on it at random, what's the probability that it cuts the surface into 2 pieces? And Miriam proved the probability is a 7th, and in fact, she gave a multitude of examples of this new kind of topological statistics that grew out of her work. So now let me just give you a glimpse of her Fields Medal winning work, which, as I mentioned, has to do with the connection between billiards and surfaces. So if we wanted to study billiards in a pentagonal billiard table, one with 5 sides, it looks pretty complicated. I've drawn a long trajectory of a billiard ball inside such a table. But it turns out that you can simplify the study by taking 2 copies of the table, the original table and then its reflection through one of its sides, and then the motion under reflection in the original table becomes the motion by straight lines in this more complicated figure made out of 2 pentagons. And now if you want to continue the billiard path once it hits the sides of this table, well, you should just glue them together in pairs. That's what the colors indicate here. And when you do that, the table turns into a surface of genus 2. And what Miriam did in this penetrating work on surfaces, for which she was awarded the Fields Medal, is she showed that the chaos of billiards is tamed by algebraic laws. Now, the depth and gravity of this result is hard to describe without knowing more about moduli spaces, but it has many consequences which are more elementary. For example, the number of periodic billiard paths in this pentagonal table grows like a quadratic polynomial. But perhaps the most striking thing about Miriam's work is the breadth of mathematical fields that she was able to integrate into a single transformative research program. She absorbed all kinds of modern mathematics, not just from me as her advisor, but from her other graduate student friends, from professors, and she was very adept at taking in these fields, internalizing them, and carried them forward as if they were part of her own understanding of the world. So I'm showing you here a movie of one of the 3-dimensional spaces that she worked with. just to give you an idea of the worlds that she tried to visualize. And her deep contributions sparked many new mathematical developments where the results are still unfolding to this day. But let me end with a picture that's much more like how I really remember Miriam. So this is one of the ones I'm most fond of. She's sitting with her daughter, Anahita, again in Palo Alto, helping her work through a coloring book. And it brings to mind for me something that happened at the ICM in Seoul in 2014 when Miriam received her Fields Medal. So I was giving the laudation on Miriam's work to thousands of people, and Miriam herself was sitting in the front row, and I was a little nervous about how she might receive my description of her own work. But then I noticed that she had brought her daughter, Anahita, with her all the way to Seoul for the occasion. And in fact, during the talk, she spent most of her time tending to a very excited young girl. So that's a nice memory for me of Miriam's warmth and openness, and it brings to mind something that the president of Stanford said on this sad occasion that I think says better than I can many of the things that all of us who knew Miriam feel. So let me end by reading that to you. So he wrote, "Miriam is gone far too soon, but her impact will live on for the thousands of women she inspired to pursue math and science. Miriam was a brilliant mathematical theorist and also a humble person who accepted honors only with the hope that it might encourage others to follow her path. Her contributions as both a scholar and a role model are significant and enduring, and she will be dearly missed around the world." Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. Now I would like to invite Professor Nina Zipser, the Dean of Faculty Affairs and Planning at Harvard University, to share with us some comments.
I want to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me to say just a few words. I'm Nina Zipser, Dean for Faculty Affairs and Planning. In that role, I oversee faculty hiring in all FAS departments. As some of you may know, Harvard tried to hire Miriam not once, but twice. While we have a pretty good mathematics department, we're always happy to have more Fields medalists. And more importantly, mathematicians of extraordinary caliber. I didn't know Miriam well in graduate school since she was just starting as I was finishing up my dissertation. For this reason, I was taken aback by how intense my reaction was to her death. Why did each new email and newspaper article make me tear up? I realized it was because of how profoundly important she was, not just to the mathematics community, but to women. Miriam was brilliant, and she was paving paths that were beautiful and essential, and she will be missed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nina. For this part of the program, we are going to have music. So I would like to invite the three artists, Parisa Bayenat, and Kasra Dalvand, and Amin Feizpour. Please. Can you turn off the lights, please?
آتش نهاد بر دل. رفتی و رفتن تو آتش نهاد بر دل. از کاروان چه ماند جز آتش. نیست مرگ شبنم.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mahshid Pourmand, a physics graduate at Boston University. Around 2.5 years ago, a week or two before Thanksgiving week, Professor Vafa emailed me and asked if we could have our lunch meeting with Iranian students and scholars of Boston area the day before Thanksgiving Day, because we are going to have a special guest. And that special guest happened to be Maryam Mirzakhani. She was here for the holiday, and it would be great if we have her. But nobody should be aware of her presence in the meeting, and the meeting shouldn't be advertised because she prefers small gatherings. I was obviously thrilled. I said, yes, sure. I'll send out the email, and I did so. I even remember a friend of mine emailed me about a day or two before and said, you know, Maryam Mirzakhani is going to be around when we are having our meeting. It would be great if we could invite her over to our meeting so we could all meet her. And since I have promised Professor Vafa already, I said, I'm sorry, but it's already late. She might have set her schedule. Maybe we could have her next time she's around. And I'm glad we did it that time because there wouldn't be a next time. I clearly remember when she entered the restaurant along with Professor Vafa. She was just so humble and at the same time charming that it would never cross your mind she is the only woman in this planet who has won the most prestigious mathematics award. I was sitting next to her for the lunch with my 1-year-old daughter at the time. And that opened the conversation. We talked about motherhood and all the challenges it brings. Her daughter, Artan, was I believe, 3 years old at that time. We talked about everything a mother could face, from separation anxiety to daycare to even potty training. She was just so relatable. You wouldn't be ashamed or uncomfortable talking to her about these everyday things in life, knowing she's a great scientist. A friend from MIT who went to the same high school she did said, "You were our hero at high school. Your picture was framed in the Hall of Fame of the school, and you were a role model all along the years at high school." You could see from her face that she felt uncomfortable from that compliment. Then another friend suggested she give a talk when she's around about academia and how to be more successful and all things related. She shrugged it off, saying, all I knew is mathematics, and that wouldn't probably interest the rest of us. She was and will be an inspiration for all women of my generation and the generations to come, since she has accomplished so much and went so far in her precious short life that made the path more believable for every woman who wants to pursue her dreams. She will be dearly missed among us. Thank you. I would like to draw your attention to the more videos from her friends and colleagues that we're going to watch now. Thank you.
Do we have it? It's now on. It's all right.
I decided that my memories with Miriam are part of our lives. At this point, they're up for me to keep and adore and cherish for the rest of my life, and I'm sure that they keep enriching my life. To honor and respect her strong sense of individuality and privacy, I am not going to talk about these glorious memories today. Instead, I'd like to talk about a few of several aspects of my life that have been influenced by Miriam. These are personal experiences, and I never talked about them to her. My first year of college coincided with Miriam's last year in college. That remarkable year redefined and reshaped many of my values and viewpoints in the young age of 18. One example is that through my relationship and friendship with Miriam, I realized that I was impressed with her for years before meeting her in person and knowing her, namely her success in Math Olympiad was not actually very significant. It was through this friendship that I learned there are deeper layers and higher dimensions to actual success and real excellence. Nowadays, as a mathematician working in an academic atmosphere where aggressive and hostile behavior is considered necessary, often considered necessary for her advancement. I feel extremely fortunate to know Miriam and some other exceptional mathematicians. I believe it was Miriam's true confidence that made her so kind and gentle to others. She simply knew how good she was, and she never felt the need to harm anyone or look down at anyone. She always knew what she was doing, and she never spent any time on anything that was not good and pure. I'm very grateful to her for showing me and teaching our community that the difference between true confidence and arrogance. As an educator, knowing how influential Miriam will be on generations of mathematicians, I praise her for emphasizing on the importance of hard work and patience. If I ever want to send one message to my students, it will be what Miriam taught us, that good work takes time, no matter how brilliant you are. And finally, as a deeply sad and grieving friend, I keep reminding myself that Miriam will live through the beautiful body of work that she gifted us. Each and every day, I will remember her, as I'm sure her fundamental and breakthrough work will motivate and inspire several new ideas and directions in our magical world of mathematics.
Hello everybody, salam bar hamegi dostan. 3 years ago on this day, we were the happiest people on the earth, and now we are all together sad within our memory, sharing a few words to relieve our pain. Miriam was an incredible person. I had the chance to have her first as a teacher when I was a member of the Iranian team for International Mathematical Olympiads. She was teaching us number theory, a beautiful branch of mathematics. She was full of energy and passion. As a student, it was a pleasant moment for me to listen to her, sharing her passion of mathematics with us. She was dedicated to mathematics. Mathematics is a universal language, a language of peace and beauty. It does not have any border. To have such a passion for mathematics, one needs to be full of peace and beauty interior-wise. Miriam was such a person. She could easily go from any branch of mathematics to any other branch, as the question of borders does not have any meaning in mathematics. She was full of humility. We have a beautiful proverb in Persian. The more a tree is laden with fruit, the more it leans. She was a full example. She had an extreme sense of quality. I think this extreme quest for quality was part of her continuous search for absolute beauty in mathematics. We are now left without such a beautiful person. What should we do next? How should we remember her? Miriam was always insisting on being a normal person, a slow mathematician. She was a very fast thinker, one of the fastest I have ever met. I can witness as her student and through the mathematical discussions I had the opportunity to have with her years later. I like to see this insistence from two sides. First, as part of her extreme modesty and her restless quest for progress and quality. Going deep is probably more a question of assiduity and insistence than being a question of speed. And second, in my opinion, which is now even more transparent on her absence, was to recall us that she was like every one of us. She went to the same schools as any one of us. She had the same type of education, the same restrictions, the same opportunities. The people of developing countries, the children of Iran, have a great example of a person who achieved the greatest of all the greats beyond all the limits. She has been and will continue to serve as an inspiring example for many people. What makes Miriam so different? In my opinion, hope, hope, and hope. She was full of hope. The story of her life is a witness. I'm sad on her departure, but full of hope for the impact she will have on the future generations of mathematicians, women, students of developing countries, students of Iran. Ruh Hashad.
I met Miriam something like 22 years ago. We were in the last year of high school and we met in the training camp for the International Mathematics Olympiad. One of the qualities that you could see very quickly in Miriam was that she was a very energetic, very motivated, hardworking, and ambitious person. And one of the qualities that you would see maybe a little bit after was that at the same time she was also a very humble person, a very modest person with her accomplishments. So, for instance, when we were in the International Mathematics Olympiad, she was one of the 2 students who, among a few hundred of participants, actually got a full score in the exam. And after we flew back to Tehran, we were being interviewed very quickly by the television reporter, who was basically pressing her to admit that she was one of the 2 students who got a full score. And her response, I remember almost exactly. She said that this exam has 42 points and I got 42 points out of this. So let's just limit that and make not a big deal out of this. So something like 10 years after, she was giving a talk at Yale based on the results in her PhD thesis. And again, I remember that like if you didn't really know anything about her area or you didn't know the kind of problems that she had solved in her thesis, just by the way that she was presenting her results in that talk, you would not be able to guess that she had actually solved such an important problem. And her results were actually so great. So I think this quality that she had, this modesty and humbleness about her own work, in combination with the high achievements that she had and the ambition that she had, is a very, very rare quality that you don't really see in a lot of people. So the fact that she's not with us, I think, is a huge loss. It's a very difficult thing to come into terms with. At the same time, it's a loss for the mathematics community, but I think for her friends, it's even a bigger loss. She was a great person, and I think for all of us, she's irreplaceable.
I met Miriam some 25 years ago. She was a 10th grade high school student. They had these training sessions in their high school, and I was invited to one of these. At the end of the class, Miriam and her best friend Roya, they came forward and we had a little chat. The principal was there. She was extremely enthusiastic and excited about these 2 girls. She was hoping that they would make it to the Olympiad team, which turned out to be the case. After that, I would see them more often. They would occasionally come to Sharif University for classes or training. And then they were selected for the Olympiad team, and the Olympiad camp was mainly based in Sharif, so I would see them, we would see them on a more regular basis. One thing I remember from those days about Miriam was once she told me that she wanted to continue maths in the university because she found mathematicians nice people, which was interesting. She was, of course, extremely good in maths and she loved maths, but at the same time, she would see the human side, and the kindness and niceness of the people there was important to her. And she was indeed an example of a kind and nice person. She was extremely helpful. I remember I was in the US, my sister was in Iran, she was a high school student. I was just starting my PhD in the US. Miriam was an undergrad in Iran. And I occasionally would speak to my sister on the phone, helping her with math questions. And sometimes it would be hard to help on the phone, so I would just contact Miriam, and she was always happy to help, so she would invite my sister over to her place, or she would meet her somewhere in the university or somewhere else, and would help my sister with math questions, high school level, elementary maths, which was amazing. I mean, Miriam was an extremely hardworking person. She valued her time very much. She was an efficient person who wouldn't waste time, but helping others was one of her values, so she would really make the effort to help. And she was a very approachable person. She could have been intimidating, of course, but she was very modest. She would consciously make effort to make people not to be intimidated by her fame or by her being a celebrity. One other thing, and maybe also that has to do with Miriam being such a kind person, was that she would always laugh. She smiled and laughed so much. When you talk to her, she would constantly laugh. You know, you would make a silly joke, and she was the one that was always laughing. And she would always also laugh when she talked. She kept giggling when she was telling her story. So. Yeah, there's this story I remember, and maybe this was one of my last stories, that Miriam was in 2015 or a couple of years ago in Oxford for the Clay Maths Institute Prize. She was there and I was there. She would not sit in the lecture, she would stand in a corner and listen to the lectures standing up. And I asked her, why don't you sit down? There are seats down there, like just go there and sit. I thought maybe she's just waiting to run out if the lecture is boring, or maybe she's going out to see Anahita, her daughter. But she said, no, I cannot sit down, my back hurts. And I said, oh, it's because of this karate accident you had in Harvard. When she was a student, she would take karate classes at Harvard, and she had an accident back then. And I thought maybe that was that. She just laughed. She said, no, it's not the karate accident. She just had a big laugh and didn't say anything. It took me a little while to realize what it was, and now we all know what it is, what it was. So that's one of the things I want to remember Miriam by, being kind and her laughter. Of course, there are so many other things we all remember Miriam by, her exceptional talent and the inspiration that she was to us and to the future generation and to the women and to the new Iranian generation of mathematicians, and I hope to the new generation of mathematicians in the world.
I met Miriam in 1993. Actually, I heard about her in 1993 and then met her in person a few months later, perhaps in 1994 or something. The story is that I was supposed to, one day I was supposed to meet Dr. Mahmoudian at IPM, the Institute for Studies in Theoretical Physics and Mathematics in Tehran. When I got there, Dr. Mahmoudian told me that he wanted to check some math that a high school student had handed to him, and he asked if I'd be willing to help him. We had nothing better to do that day except for meeting with Dr. Rahmandad. So I spent the morning with him going over the arguments. And at the time, Dr. Rahmandad was teaching a summer course on graph theory for a bunch of gifted school children at Sharif University. One of the topics that he had talked about was decomposing graphs to disjoint unions of cycles, including the rather curious example of decomposing a tripartite graph into a union of 5 cycles. This was considered the first difficult case of the general problem. He had asked the students to find examples of tripartite graphs that could be decomposed as a collection of 5 cycles, and he had offered $1 for each new example. A couple of lectures later, Miriam had found an infinite family of examples. She had also found a number of necessary conditions as well as some sufficient conditions for the different. These were the results that Dr. Rahmandad and I checked that day, checking the intricate details of the really complicated counting argument. Carefully, checking all that carefully, took the whole morning. When we were finished, Dr. Rahmandad, who was at the time younger than I am now, he was a young man at the time, said he really needed to run to the bathroom. When he came back, quoting a Persian proverb, he said, well, people often say that the moment you need to go to the bathroom, you forget about the pains of love. Obviously, those people have never seen good math. At the time, the joke was that Miriam was obviously smart, but wasn't that smart. Otherwise, she could have milked Dr. Rahmandad for all he was worth. Examples one by one, as opposed to getting a few years later, Iran hosted a regional math Olympiad, the ECHO Math Olympiad, among 7 or 8 neighboring countries. In a speech to the high school's contestants, Mohammad Jawad Larijani, who was the head of IPM at the time, or he's still the head of IPM, told the kids that he was looking forward to those contestants becoming successful scientists in the future. And to encourage that process, he would present a coin of solid gold to the first of these contestants to publish a scientific paper, like a real scientific paper. Miriam was the immediate winner of the gold coin, as she had already published a paper with Dr. Rahmandad. Later, I used to occasionally see Miriam in Cambridge. One time, Akhtari was going to Cambridge from Princeton to see one of his advisors, Ganetian, and I needed a break from work, so I tagged along. We drove to Boston and then to Cambridge. I stopped by the Science Center to see Miriam. She said, let me tell you a result. She told me her theorem about counting geodesics on Riemann surfaces and sketched the argument. Being an expert, I really didn't appreciate how impressive the theorem was. But I did for sure think that the argument was absolutely gorgeous. At dinner, a friend asked her what she was up to mathematically. Miriam turned to me and said, you want to tell him what I've been doing? With a grin. Oi. I did, in a couple of places, she had to step in and correct my arguments, or my explanation. On the drive back to Princeton that evening, I told Iman, or I asked Iman, what he thought of Miriam's work, and whether he thought Miriam was ready to graduate. Iman assured me that the stuff that Miriam had done was super impressive, and that she would be famous for it. Miriam had not given me any indication that this was an outstanding problem that had baffled people for years. She was just excited about the geometric picture that had emerged, and that's the main thing she conveyed to me in her explanation. A year later, Miriam was an assistant professor at Princeton, and then a year after that, a senior mathematician friend told me that Miriam could be the first woman Fields medalist. This was in 2006 in Philadelphia. Those of us who knew Maryam in person probably have a hard time thinking of her as the genius that she's been portrayed as in the media. She didn't have any of the pretensions of the stereotypical genius of children's books. She had the same qualms and worries as the rest of us. She too had wondered at some point who to work with in graduate school, whether she would finish her thesis in time, whether she would find a decent academic job, whether she could balance the demands of motherhood with being a professor, whether she would be tenured at some point in this century. When all of this is done, when all the media hype dies out, those of us who knew her in person remember her for the lovely person that she was. We loved her for who she was, and we would have loved her just the same, even without her honors and awards.
Okay, so please allow me to invite my friend now, Professor Hazhir Rahmandad of the Sloan School of Management at MIT, who is going to share with us some memories and comments.
Thank you, Artan. It was 22 years ago that I met Miriam, and it was the end of the summer camp for the high school scientific Olympiads in Iran when I had just joined the chemistry Olympiad team, and she was already a star with 2 international gold medals and one of our heroes at the time. So nevertheless, she came to congratulate my family, and that was a very kind gesture which really stayed with me for a long time. And it was my first introduction to the kind soul whose short but fruitful life we are celebrating today. So Miriam was a dear friend to me, whom I best got to know during our PhD years in Boston in early 2000s. I'm not really a mathematician, and the colleagues who have already talked beautifully about her work and her legacy. So I focus my short remarks on 2 observations related to Miriam. One, more broadly, acknowledging those who enable talents like Miriam to thrive. And second, a more personal note about Miriam. So first, I would like to take this opportunity to recognize the many unsung heroes who enabled Miriam and thousands like her in her generation to follow their dreams. I'm talking about the dedicated and loving teachers and administrators in schools across Iran who instill the love of learning in their pupils every day, as well as many selfless faculty who dedicated their lives to training these talents, many having foregone better opportunities in the West to go back to Iran to build the higher education system there. From Mr. Niusha and Mrs. Hayrizadeh to Dr. Sheshmani, Dr. Mahmoodian, Dr. Tabesh, and many, many other peoples, these folks have created the nurturing environments in which talents like Miriam could find their passion and thrive despite war, economic hardships, and political turmoil that was the norm for our generation. We can't return their favor, but we are really thankful. Second, let me reflect on an observation which we may call the Mirzakhani paradox. Here is the paradox. Miriam was a very private person. She was never into promoting herself. In fact, media outlets had a very hard time getting her to join an interview, even after she had won the Fields Medal. And on the other hand, her work was extremely abstract. It had really little to do with the daily concerns of a typical person on the street. So how is it possible that such an individual, and at such an early age, has become one of the most publicly recognized and admired figures in the contemporary Iranian society and community? I don't have an answer for this question, but I like to believe that part of the answer lies in the beautiful character of Miriam and her sense of decency. We all know about and have heard about Miriam's mathematical genius, but her grit was no less impressive. A friend recalled from the undergraduate years in Sharif University, when most of us would never visit the library in our years there as a student, but Miriam was there pretty much every day, always having the maximum number of books that you could borrow from the library at her possession. And I think her diligence and hardworking nature was both driven by her extremely high standards for herself and by her truly internalized joy of doing mathematics. So in a sense, for her, effort was the reward when she was doing mathematics. Now, not only her high standards were for her work, but also she aspired to very high ethical standards. Over many years of interacting with her in various capacities and in conversations, I don't remember even one case where I could question the ethics of her position or action. Another attractive feature of Maryam was her humility, despite having all those high standards and ambitions. You can really learn about a person by looking at how they treat others when they are in a position of power. For example, if you're a world-renowned mathematician and you're interacting with a junior student. And in these settings, you would see that Maryam would try to put the other person at ease and create a relationship of equals. And kind of that's where her kindness comes out very clearly. And this is kind of, you could see it in all other settings. If, for example, we went out to a restaurant together, the way she treated the servers, how much tip we left, her concern for not making a mess on our table, or making sure that our kids were not bothering others around us. All of these kind of pointed to her kind soul. And another example, she was never a gossip. If the conversation kind of drifted towards talking about other people's personal lives, she would try to kind of nudge the conversation to a different direction. These all may sound simple and small, but they are really characteristics that are cultivated over a lifetime with lots of effort. And I think this is effort that Maryam had undertaken. And you could see this, that as a result of that, she had a beautiful character that put anybody at ease when they met her and built a trust and respect in any observer. I think that's really part of the explanation for the paradox. In short, I think Maryam has become a role model for many, not because we can all aspire to become mathematicians of her caliber. Few can. She's a worthy role model because we can choose a path we care about and enjoy our efforts regardless of what others think, because we can continuously reach out for higher standards at work in our personal lives, because we can be extremely successful and remain genuinely humble, because we can love our country and be a citizen of the world, and we can become a world-famous figure without tooting or tweeting our own horn. At a time that we are surrounded by examples who thrive on working less and claiming more, our best celebration of that lovely soul may be in cultivating our Maryams within. Her example will motivate many in that path for the years to come. Thank you.
Okay, so when we were making the schedule for the program, I approached many of colleagues of Maryam. And of course, some of them could not be here or could not be in a situation that some of them are traveling, as this is summer. So some, including Professor Alina Marianne of Northeastern University, who overlapped with Maryam while she was a PhD student at Harvard, they sent me a statement, and I would like to read this for you on her behalf. So this is by Alina Marianne. Upon getting to know Maryam, one was struck by her serenity and good humor. She had a smile most of the time. Throughout our graduate school years, I never saw her upset or even once swept by a wave of negativity. The graduate student quarters in the Harvard Math Department were very active in the evening hours. Many of us were studying late, Maryam as well. On these occasions, during needed breaks in the department alcoves, interesting conversations were typically ignited. As many students were foreigners, discussions of education practices in America and other cultures, Eastern European, East Asian, Persian, were frequent, nuanced and critical. I remember Maryam participating with interest and curiosity, sharing the stories of her earlier school years. Her attitude was sunny, tonic, and constructive. The only way I remember her being critical was through humor and good-natured irony, always from a position of warmth. Outside the math department, one could sometimes meet Miriam at the evening showings of the Harvard Film Archive, which at the time had a broad program of films far from the mainstream. Miriam was following keenly some of the film directions featured by the archive. I remember thoughtful conversations with her after the movies. Her perspective, informed by her experience living in a radically different culture, was wise, balanced, and always guided by a sense of compassion and warmth. So this is by Alina Maryam. So we are now almost done with our program. Before closing, please let me thank the main organizers of this event. So these are the members of the Harvard Iranian Student Association and the Boston-based scholars. Please stand up. So Mahshid Pourmand, please. Miss Latifeh, no, here. Miss Latifeh Aavani. And Miss Fatemeh Kazemi here. Once again, I would like to thank the Department of Mathematics, Amin, for so much help and support, for sponsoring the program, for having the staff coming on the Sunday. It was in particular difficult given the short time that we proposed to organize this. Finally, I would like to thank you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your attention to the work of Miriam. And I would like to make a request. This is my personal request. I really think that if you want to keep Miriam and people like Miriam alive, the best way, other than knowing about her personality, is to learn about her work. So let's all try to make Miriam's work, the mathematics, for example, in this case, that Miriam developed, accessible to our students. There are plenty of books, actually. We can all get them from somewhere. There are plenty of lectures. Let's just read and learn and improve it. And hopefully we can have more of Maryam Mirzakhani's in future. Thank you all. Good night.